It was August 2007 when the University of the Philippines, the country's premier state university, was shaken by a tragedy that revealed once again the deadly cost of fraternity hazing. A young man named Cris Mendez, only 20 years old, full of dreams and promise, entered the gates of UP with hopes of making a difference. But instead of a future in public service, what awaited him was a brutal death, one that exposed the dark secrets of brotherhood and the silence that protects it. This is Pinoy true crime story, and tonight we bring you the haunting tale of the hazing death of Cris Mendez, the neophyte who never came home. In the quiet halls of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, a tragedy unfolded in 2007 that would forever stain the reputation of one of the most prestigious institutions in the country and expose once again the dark culture of fraternity hazing. It was the story of a young man with dreams of serving the people, a man named Cris Mendez. Cris was the youngest of 4 children in a middle-class family. He grew up in General Santos City, raised with love, values, and a deep sense of responsibility. To his family and friends, he was kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and always willing to lend a hand. He excelled in school and carried big dreams of making a difference in society, perhaps even serving in public office one day. His ambition was clear. He wanted to be someone who could give back to the community that had raised him. By 2007, Cris was already in graduate school at the University of the Philippines, studying public administration. He was only 20 years old, a young man full of potential. Like many other students, he was drawn to the promise of brotherhood, camaraderie, and connections that fraternities often offered. For Cris, joining a fraternity wasn't about prestige. He believed it was a way to belong, to expand his circle, and perhaps to have a platform to further his ideals of service and leadership. But beneath the surface of tradition and loyalty, behind the slogans of unity and brotherhood, there lurked an old and dangerous practice: hazing. For decades, initiation rites in fraternities across the country had been marred by stories of violence, humiliation, and even death. Laws had been passed, like the anti-hazing law of 1995, but enforcement was weak, and secrecy was the shield that allowed such practices to continue. On the night of August 27, 2007, Cris attended what he believed was another step in his initiation process. That night, in a house in Quezon City, fraternity members gathered. Among them were neophytes like Cris, young men eager to prove themselves worthy of acceptance. What unfolded there was not brotherhood. It was violence. Cris endured repeated blows, his body taking hit after hit. Accounts later revealed that he was subjected to physical hazing that pushed his body beyond its limits. Unlike what many believed at the time, Cris did not collapse on the spot. Instead, he went home that night, battered, his body silently carrying the evidence of what he had endured. The following morning, Cris was found unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. At just 20 years old, Cris Mendez was declared dead on arrival. His body bore the marks of brutal hazing, bruises, swellings, and injuries that told a story of unimaginable pain. News of his death spread quickly, sending shockwaves across UP Diliman and the entire nation. Cris wasn't just another student. He was a symbol of promise, a young man who wanted to dedicate his life to service. His sudden death at the hands of those who were supposed to be his brothers outraged the public. His family was devastated. They had sent their son to the country's premier university to study, to build a future. Instead, they received him lifeless, his body broken. The grief of his parents and siblings became the grief of a nation that once again asked, how many more lives must be lost before hazing truly ends? Investigations followed. The fraternity implicated was Sigma Rho, one of the oldest and most influential fraternities in the country, known for its powerful alumni in politics, law, and government. But the very influence that made the fraternity prestigious also made it nearly untouchable. Witnesses were silent. Members closed ranks. Nobody wanted to testify. Nobody wanted to speak against the fraternity. The case dragged on. Autopsy results confirmed that Cris had died from multiple blunt force injuries consistent with hazing. Yet, despite public outcry, charges moved slowly. The fraternity denied involvement, and many of its members refused to cooperate. In the Senate, hearings were conducted. Senators questioned fraternity leaders, alumni, and university officials. Cris's story was retold again and again, each time highlighting the brutality of hazing and the culture of silence that allowed it to thrive. The Mendez family, while grieving, remained steadfast in their call for justice. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted their son's death to mean something. Students at UP and other universities staged protests. They lit candles, held vigils, and demanded the abolition of hazing. Posters and banners carried Cris's name, making sure the world would not forget what had been done to him. But in the years that followed, the case stagnated. While several members of Sigma Rho were initially implicated, many charges were dismissed or delayed. The lack of witnesses, the reluctance of insiders to break their silence, and the influence of powerful backers made justice difficult to achieve. For the Mendez family, it was a painful reminder that the fight against hazing wasn't just about changing laws. It was about breaking down a culture of secrecy, fear, and blind loyalty. They continued to honor Cris's memory, speaking out whenever hazing claimed another life. Every year, when another student died from hazing, Cris's name was brought back to the headlines. His story became a rallying cry, a symbol of how broken the system was and how much needed to change. In 2018, the death of Horacio Atio Castillo III in another fraternity hazing case echoed the tragedy of Cris Mendez, proving that little had changed. Cris's death in 2007 should have been a turning point, but more than a decade later, the same cycle continued. Secret initiations, brutal rites, silence, and then death. What made his story unforgettable was not just the cruelty he suffered, but the promise of what he could have become. A leader, a servant of the people, a son who carried his family's dreams. In the end, Christopher Mendez became another name in the long list of hazing victims in the Philippines. But to those who remember him, to his friends, family, and fellow students, he was more than that. He was the reminder that behind every neophyte is a human being, a son, a brother, a friend, someone who should never have to pay with his life just to be accepted. As long as hazing exists, as long as young men and women are told that violence is the price of belonging, Cris's story will continue to haunt us. His death is a wound that the nation must never allow to heal in silence, because silence is what protects the guilty. Cris Mendez was more than just another victim of hazing. He was a son, a brother, a friend, a student who carried with him the hopes of his family and the promise of a brighter future. His death was supposed to spark change, to end the cycle of violence hidden behind the word brotherhood. And yet, years later, new names are still added to the list of lives cut short by hazing. This is Pinoy True Crime Story, reminding you that Cris's story is not just about loss. It is a warning, a reminder, and a call to action. Because until the culture of silence is broken, and until justice truly prevails, the question will always remain: how many more?